Hi, my name's Harper Jones with Life with Leverage, and we coach people on the infinite banking concept. Today, we're going to talk about comparing an ideal savings vehicle. There's a previous video I did where you can look at the characteristics of an ideal savings vehicle. I would say go watch that, and we'll link it below in the description. Now, we're going to look at specifically a savings account, a high yield savings account versus a whole life policy, and just look at the performance, not borrowing against it, but just the performance side by side. Now let's flip to the screen and check it out. As you can see here, we're going to just glance at what does the ideal savings vehicle look like. And if we're going to say, hey, what's it look like? Let's look at the attributes or the characteristics of that savings vehicle. Now, competitive rate of return. We work hard for our money. We want our money to work hard for us. So we'd like at least reasonable competitive rate of return. We definitely need it to be guaranteed and need it to be liquid. What's the point of a savings vehicle if it's not going to be guaranteed and we can't rely on it? And what's the point if the savings are sitting somewhere and it's not liquid? If we have to wait a couple weeks to access it, maybe we have a great deal on a car or on a business or an investment, we can't get the funds, doesn't really matter, right? So we need to be liquid, we need ease of access. We would like for it to be leverageable. What does that mean? We'd like to be able to borrow against it, put that same dollar to work in two places. Well, what do I mean by that? If you have money sitting in an account, say a savings account, we'd like to be able to borrow against it so it doesn't interrupt the compounding, then we can leverage against it to go invest. Yes, there's going to be a interest carry for that or a cost of capital, but sometimes that can outperform, as we'll see here in a minute. Then we definitely like it to be tax-free if possible. Why is that? Because if you have to pay taxes, that interrupts the compounding. And then credit protected or litigation proof means, hey, if we were to get sued or in a lawsuit, how easy or hard is it to get the cash or capital? And then the compounding, definitely would like it to compound over a long period of time at a consistent rate that is not interrupted by taxes or withdrawing the money. So let's check out the next slide. One thing I need to touch on is savings versus investing. Savings is going to be the storing of wealth in a safe, liquid form that we have access to when needed, like I was talking about. Investing is more strategic actions. Say investing in a business or in real estate or loaning money to projects for investors. You don't know exactly when you're going to get the money back, or maybe you have a timetable, but you can't just go get it right when you need it, but you could have a higher rate of return. So you got to make sure you got to separate the two, because there's inherent risk over here. That should be minimal to no risk over in the savings department. Something that would be under the savings umbrella would be a savings account, life insurance contract. It could be a treasury bills you put money in. It could be possibly bonds you put money in. It could be just checking account, a CD, things of that nature. Investing examples would be owning a business, investing in a business, real estate, loaning money to a developer on a project, get a higher rate of return, things of that nature. I have a couple notes here. I want to make sure I touch on it. We're looking at savings versus investing, different savings vehicles, and now let's flip to the next slide. What I've done is I've put together some of the characteristics from the previous slide, had a savings account versus whole life policy side by side. Now, traditional thinkers going to use a savings account. Hey, that's awesome. You're at least saving the money versus just having it in a checking account or cash doing nothing. And let's look at what you're going to get. You're going to get a reasonably competitive rate of return. Depending on how much liquidity you have, you might be able to get a couple percent, maybe a little bit higher, like 4 or 5, depending on the interest rate environment and how much money you have in there. You're usually going to be somewhat guaranteed, maybe not predictable on the return over an extended period of time, but guaranteed on your cash. You're going to have liquidity, unless it's maybe tied up in a CD for a year or something, a little bit less liquidity. You could leverage against it, but the problem is if you have money at, say, a bank or in treasury bills or something like that, then when you borrow against it, they're going to mark it up. They might give you 3 or 4% interest. Then they might charge you 7 or 8. Credit protected. If it's at a bank, it's going to be more exposed to lawsuits, right? And then the compounding is interrupted from both taxes and from you withdrawing it. So if you don't leave it in the account and you withdraw it to go spend it, to go pay taxes, to go invest in real estate or a business or put it in the stock market, then you're going to have either interest carry that's fairly stout, or you're going to have to stop the compounding by withdrawing. Then the bank controls the line of credit, or a third party essentially controls the line of credit, which is something that we really need to take note of, because if you have all that money outstanding, you were to borrow against it, they could technically call it, or if you're reading the contractual rights, you're not as much control, can maybe not renew it at the end of the year. And then supplementing income. If you have money in a savings account compounding for you, you could start withdrawing or borrowing against it to kind of live off that or supplement some income later on into retirement or passive income years, I like to say. Now, a whole life policy would outperform that for sure, but I don't have that illustrated today. Now let's look at the whole life policy. It's going to have a competitive rate of return historically better than savings accounts overall. It's going to be guaranteed predictable returns or growth throughout the years over a long period of time that you can bank on. They have guarantees and also a potential dividend kick for higher return. And then great liquidity to access by withdrawal or borrowing against it. You're going to be able to leverage, but there's no markup on interest rate really. So why is that? Since you're part owner of the insurance company, if you work with a mutual insurance company, you are able to actually borrow from that massive pool of capital within that organization, the insurance carrier, that you also have a policy with. And your collateral is your cash value. You'll borrow against that in the form of a line of credit called a policy loan in the insurance world. And they might charge you 5-ish%, but then you're going to get somewhere close to that returning within the policy. And to top it all off, that return's tax deferred. If handled properly, is really tax free. It's going to be credit protected. You're going to have compounding that is not interrupted by taxes or withdrawing. You, when you borrow, fully control the line of credit. It's going to be a more competitive interest rate, better contractual terms, and then you can supplement income with the policy later in life in a tax-free manner very well. And one thing I didn't list on here is you also have a death benefit rolled into the whole picture. Next slide, let's look at savings account versus whole life policy. The numbers. An ideal savings vehicle comparison. Let me zoom in, make sure people can see this well. Now, essentially what is happening is we're going to look at scenario one. Scenario one is just comparing the whole life apples to apples with the savings account and how those two perform, putting the same amount of money in over a period of time, specifically 30 years in this scenario, and seeing how they compare side by side. Very important. The next part, and one thing we coach as well, is infinite banking, of course, and actually using your policy and taking more control of your money. Okay, you could still do a similar concept with the savings account, and we could see how that compares. That would be scenario two. Using a savings account, for example, and using a infinite banking contract, or let's say, life insurance contract, whole life contract, and borrowing against the two and seeing how they perform. Then, because there'll be interest carry and other factors that play into it. And then scenario three would be, hey, withdrawing from the accounts and putting it back over time as you're funding and buying stuff. So scenario one, okay, just comparing side by side. Scenario two, using it and borrowing. And scenario three, actually withdrawing and putting back over time. Okay, so you'd stop the compounding per se. With that said, I have 3 simple questions for you to get into here to get into the mindset. What in life, if you have instant gratification, is it really going to benefit you mid and long term? You really need to delay your gratification. So many people are like, hey, let me have that extra alcoholic drink. Hey, let me have that extra bite to eat. Hey, let me have that extra, oh, I'm not going to go to the gym today, whatever that may be. And if you delay your gratification, all those results and such will compound over time. Another question is, tell me something you don't first invest into that takes some time to get going and compounding that's going to be great in life, right? Real estate, a business, health, a diet, fitness, investment, so on and so forth takes time to compound and to grow. It's not instant gratification. It needs to be delayed gratification for the good benefit long term. With all that said, let's dive in. Let's get into it. So we're going to look at scenario one. What do I have in coming videos? Scenario 1, 2, and 3. Scenario 1, just comparing a savings account or an ideal savings vehicle that I had listed previously against a whole life policy side by side, so apples to apples. Once again, you can't compare a whole life policy to an investment because they're not the same thing, and we can get into that in a different video. But if we're comparing these two accounts here, savings account versus say a whole life policy, let's go through it and saying we're not borrowing against it, we're not using it, we'll put money in there, let it sit, and just look at the comparisons. What I've done here, savings account in the gray, whole life policy in the orange. I did end of year recap, into year 1, into year 2, through year 10. Then I skipped to year 15, year 20, year 25, and then year 30. Then I have cash going into savings at the beginning of the year. High yield savings account, or a savings account that returns 4%, and then it's netted out at 3% after taxes. So if you're paying taxes because it is a taxable account, a savings account, then I just said you're at a 25% tax bracket, which 4% minus 25% taxes would be 3% net. So I had the compounding at that number. Really, that's conservative. I would think someone's in a higher tax bracket if they're able to plop enough money into an account to get these returns. But let's just keep it at the 25% taxes, 3% net. The term cost is a comparison for, if we're going to use a whole life policy, you're going to have a death benefit. So what you need to have is a alternative. If you're going to use just savings account and not a whole life policy or a life insurance contract here, then the 30-year term would be a nice comparison. So I ran a same health rating for a 41-year-old male for a 30-year term at the same death benefit approximately you would have within this whole life policy. And that cost was about $2,430 a year, give or take. So what do? Put 50 in at the beginning of the year. We're going to pay this at the beginning of the year, so you back that out. And then you would take those two numbers, which would be 50 minus this, and then compound at 3% over the period. We're going to fund $50,000 for 4 years, and then $20,000 year 5 through year 10, and then stop. I wouldn't recommend discontinuing paying premiums or putting cash into an account at this point. I'm doing it so it's easier to illustrate, and we did something in the whole life policy, which is what's called a RPU, or reduced paid up, where you can essentially take less of a death benefit, does not hurt the cash values, and in return no more premium for the rest of the policy. Once again, would not recommend doing that, but I did it for illustrative purposes. Now that we get into the numbers, first year put in 50, then you're going to have, after the term cost, after you pay your taxes, end of the year, you'll have about $49,000, whereas the policy, you'll have about $31,000. Okay, keep in mind over here, they're customer of the bank, you're not the owner. And the whole life policy, you're the owner, both the customer with the life insurance contract, and since it's with a mutual insurance company, or it should be, you'd also be the owner, and so you're starting to get ownership in that company. Now year 2, 3, 4, putting in the 50 for 3 years, then you'll see as these numbers compound at the end of 4 years, you'll have about $205,000, where over here you have $175,000. Once, keep in mind, we're putting this in an account, letting it sit there, okay? Year 5 through 10, you're going to have $20,000 each year. As you can see, cash into policy, $20,000 each year. Cash into savings, $20,000 each year. End of year 10, $362 almost, compared to $344. The savings account is still beating it, but keep in mind, we have a death benefit on the right side for life. All the money in there is in a tax-favored environment. Okay, it's going to be creditor protected. You can actually borrow against it at 4 to 5%, whereas on the left side right now, it's probably about 8%. And then it's all compounding interrupted. You also could, instead of borrowing against the savings account, withdraw, but then you would stop this compounding, whereas the whole life policy, you could just borrow against it in a more favorable manner. After year 10, you get to year 15, you have $406,000, and over here you have $437,000, almost $438,000. So at year 15, you're starting to surpass by a reasonable amount. Year 20, 25, 30, you'll have $457,000, $517,000, $586,000. So you have $555,000, almost $7,000, and then $871,000. What happens at the end of 30 years? If you were to do nothing else except put cash in the savings account and let it go in each scenarios for those 10 years and just let it just compound, you, because you're the owner on the right side, you're going to get close to 50% more on your money just by flowing it into a whole life policy over that time period. What's the trade-off? Hey, Harper, what's the con? You are not going to have access to as much of your cash in the beginning years, these first few years, specifically year one, because you're establishing a system. Which then brings me to where in life, if you have instant gratification, is it going to benefit you versus if you delay gratification, things are always going to be better. Now think about that in any point in your life, relationships, health, diet, or the financial world for sure. Another thing would be attainable versus sustainable. The savings account, I'm saying, hey, you could have an attainable return, but is it sustainable over a long period of time to have that consistent return that I've illustrated at the 4%? Whereas a whole life policy, this is sustainable. It has been sustainable for over 100 years, and you can look at the historical performances. Also savings, someone can say, hey, I want to make sure I have my savings because I need it. Well, your savings really should never go down to zero. So if you have proper emergency funds and proper savings, I would never say put every last dollar into a policy. You could flow it over the years and get substantial amounts of cash in there. But what you really need to do is have excess savings. So really this cash drag, I like to call it, in this first year where you have 31 from the 50, you have to factor in that you may not even miss that cash because you're going to recap it over the years and then throughout the life of the policy far surpass it, right? We have the stage set with the policy. Now the next step is what's infinite banking. So one thing I want to say is you could look at policies all day. Some could have a higher rate of return or internal rate of return than the other. I always want to make sure you have a reasonable policy that's returning a reasonable rate, but the main focus shouldn't be on that. It should be a factor, but it should be on how easy is it to access your cash from the policy. Do you have a good coach, an infinite banking coach or infinite banking practitioner to help you out? Is there a good servicing team with that practitioner? Do they have good reviews? Do they have a good book of business? Have they been in the business a long time? Do they have their own policies? So on and so forth. And I made a video that went into that called Requirements for an Infinite Banking System. That will be in the description as well. But infinite banking is what makes this even more powerful. Now, if you read Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker, you'll see that in the equipment financing examples or the IBC Sisters examples in his book, the numbers start performing even better than this when you actually use the policy. So when you actually utilize the cash and borrow against it, then you could do things like invest in a business. And then you're the bank for that. You've established your stage, you're a bank that's going to do this for you, an outperform savings vehicle. But if you're going to now go invest, you are going to have the cash anyway sitting somewhere. Where should you sit it? Here's an ideal place or ideal savings vehicle to do it. Other examples could be escrowing. If you're going to sit money at a bank to escrow, like taxes, insurance, reserves, things of that nature, or payroll, you could actually flow it through your policy, borrow against it, and then pay it, and then you could recapture lost interest or profit. Then something later in life is the death benefit can go income tax free at a multiple of what you contributed, which is great for generational wealth, starting an endowment, or helping out your business or family. That could pass within a couple months, say 30, 60, 90 days upon someone passing away. Death benefit comes, immediate liquidity to help pay estate taxes, other taxes, and once again, is income tax free if handled properly. A liquidity for the business, or it could be used to fund a buy-sell, as in you have business partners. You could utilize those death benefit proceeds when the policy pays out to pay out a partner and potentially get a step up in basis as well that the other partner could get if they bought out with death proceeds and not have the headache with being partners with spouses or paying out over a period of time or things of that nature, which I'll do a video on as well in the buy-sell world. But there's a lot of different tools or ways you could use this policy. It's really like a Swiss Army knife. Hope this video helped, guys. I know it's a little bit longer than I normally do. This information is just so valuable, and I want to make sure I took the time to go through it. If anything was confusing, or you want me to go through some scenarios for you specifically, or you had further questions, please reach out, harper@lifewithleverage.com. You also could check out our website at lifewithleverage.com. Going to be doing more videos, some on buy, sell, and estate planning, some more advanced strategies like that to try to maintain keeping key employees or executive bonus plans, Some of this stuff's more advanced. That'll definitely be broken down simply. And there'll be more of the scenarios I said, scenario 2 and scenario 3, about borrowing against this instead of just comparing apples to apples, and then also withdrawing and putting it back. Really hope this helps. Reach out. Looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks.